Welcome back to Quinte Connection. So great to talk to Scott Granville for the first time about his soccer book. Well, now back on your TV, Quinte, an absolute joy. My favorite co-host, Richard Hughes, is back with us, our resident historian. Richard Hughes has so many great programs on your TV, Quinte, as a co-host and as a host, and you might have seen him on the Remembrance Day ceremony for Belleville. So, Richard, so great to have you back again. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Well, it's nice to be here. It's always nice to have a chat with you. And indeed, I was thinking I've done about 35 programs with your TV, so it's really one of my favorite places.
Well, I was absolutely thrilled when I heard you were mirroring your passion for historical research and for hockey. So walk us through the start of this fabulous book, Belleville Hometown Hockey, because it's so great to have this finally in print. I've just been reading it as we've been taping segments.
Well, you know, it's interesting that actually the seed of that book was right at your TV. About 3 years ago, we were doing a history of the Memorial Arena, a documentary film that I was doing with J.P. Lemieux at your TV. And as I researched this documentary film and I came back, these stories are fabulous. These are very interesting stories, but they'd never, ever been brought together and written down in a book form. And I said, hey, there's a gap there in our local history. Now, we're all very, taken by hockey. It's our game. It fills up our winters. But the early part had never been recorded. So I said, there's a challenge I couldn't refuse.
Where did you start with this, Richard? How did you kind of initially start weaving the stories before? Do you go to the community archives, or do you have a specific decade you focus on? How does it work with building something like this? Because it's from 1865 to 1930, which is remarkable.
Well, there's a great deal of information. First of all, the community archives, of course. The newspapers, newspapers report on hockey games and sporting events. So the newspapers going way back into the mid-1800s are available at the community archives, and they're searchable from home, easily searchable. And of course, there's other sources, books, libraries, and places like that. But that's where it started. As I say, I thought you can't talk about hockey without talking about what was there before hockey. Well, there was skating. Well, skating, where did it come from? And then you go back to the early days. So the book begins with when there was no such thing as skating or hockey. Then the birth of skating, the development, the progress in making better and better skates, and then the people playing these games. All summer they've been playing lacrosse and things like that with sticks and balls. And that evolved into playing on ice with sticks and balls, which didn't work. So they invented a hockey stick and they invented a puck. And the game took off from there, and it evolved in other parts of Canada. And of course, by 1890, it was in Montreal and Ottawa and Toronto, and everybody was reading about it in the newspapers, and then it came to Belleville.
What was our first hockey team, Richard, and what year was that? When was that recorded?
Yes, it goes back to 1891. And of course, by then, as I say, people had been skating on the bay and on the river for a long time. They were good skaters, and the young fellows, as I say, they were athletes. They played sports all summer. They had nothing to do all winter. So when hockey came, they read about it and they started playing. They formed a little team, and mind you, a team at that time was 7 people. 7 people composed a team for many years. And then there were a number of teams, basically the businesses, the clothing stores, the newspapers, the banks, the butcher shops, they all formed little teams. And they would challenge each other. They'd put a little note in the newspaper, we challenge that team to play hockey. But there was no organization to it. It was just challenges back and forth, and it evolved and it grew, and ultimately formed a city team about 1892.
When did the women get involved in all this?
The women?
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, that is an interesting story in itself. In the mid-1800s, you got a picture. This is the Victorian era. Rules for every part of conduct, and the woman's place was in the home. The woman's place was not in sports. That was a man's domain. However, right from the very beginning, skating was allowed for girls and women too, on the basis that, first of all, you're out in the open, so your morality was protected, and it was a good, healthy thing out in the fresh air. So skating was always allowed. And then hockey came about 1890. The Victorian era is getting late, it's opening up a bit, and girls could move right into hockey, and they did. The Ontario School for the Deaf had excellent teams. The high school had excellent teams. And as I say, they for many years they played just as I say this challenges basis with an organization. But the girls were in hockey right from the beginning.
Good to hear. So your book ends in 1930. Are you planning to continue on with another book, or where do you want to keep going with this? Because it's so great to have this in one concise document.
Well, it's interesting. You say, well, why 1930? First of all, 1929, actually, December 1929 was when the arena, which we now know as the Memorial Arena, when it opened. Up until then, it had all been natural ice. It started in open air, just out in the open with snowbanks around a piece of ice. They played hockey on that until it was, when was it? It was 1899. We got our first covered rink. And at that point, we joined the Ontario Hockey Association. And then there were two other covered rinks through the 1910s, 1920s. And finally, at the end of 1929, and that's a wonderful story in itself, the Memorial Arena opened with artificial ice, and that ended that era that I covered, that era of incredible, these young athletes playing out in frigid weather, and the sports fans by the hundreds and hundreds coming out, standing on snowbanks, freezing themselves, but following that game. It's really an amazing story.
Well, it wasn't too long ago, just a couple weeks ago in November, I saw you in a promo video about the old Memorial Arena site in downtown, the Memorial Marketplace. You were there for a grand opening event. So, Richard, what is it like stepping in that new refurbished place? Because they're going to hold lots of businesses there, hopefully. They've got their second business in so far, that cracked house glass design.
It's really quite interesting. Yes, I've been working with Task Force Engineering and their promotional people. Well, first of all, the story of the development of the Memorial Arena, that's where my book closes. I tell the whole story of how that, of course, wasn't called the Memorial Arena when it opened. It was just the Belleville Arena. But you couldn't imagine. The Belleville fans had been going to the rink. It was over on Turnbull Street. It was unheated. It was dilapidated. It was really a very crummy place. And then on, I think it was December 4th, 1929, the Memorial Arena opened. Brand new, beautiful brick building with wide open and excellent seating. The people of Belleville were absolutely thrilled beyond measure. They couldn't imagine this beautiful, and it had music, they had sound systems. So they were just so thrilled to have this artificial ice. And that was, as I say, at the end of 1929. It was really a big, big event in the city. And of course, from there, it went forward before that, the hockey season or the skating season, for that matter, was generally January 1 to about March 15. So once you got artificial ice, it's now October 1 up until well into April. So once you had the Memorial Arena, you could have more teams, more hockey, more skating, and it was a whole new world. But you mentioned, what about the future? Other people have written. Certainly, if the McFarland's era is well written, and the Bulls era is well written, so I don't have to cover that. The gap I found that anybody who appreciates hockey, you appreciate hockey. We all think it's a wonderful sport, but nobody had ever told the story of how we got here, and that to me, as I say, it's a fascinating story.
Well, Richard, thank goodness for you for making sure that you write a bit of history that was undocumented. For folks who want to get a hold of this book, Belleville Hockey Town, whereabouts do we go, Richard, especially if we want to gift it for Christmas or birthday next year?
It's available, first of all, at Chapters. They have it. It's available at the Community Archives, which is in the library building, and it's available at the Chamber of Commerce, their log cabin on Moira Street. So, and it's always available for me, too. But it has been a big hit, and a lot of people are saying it is, they're giving it to their hockey playing relatives for Christmas, which makes me very happy.